Welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Elliot Roe and Dr. Tricia Cardner. This is the first of our episodes, and we'll just start by introducing ourselves. So, Tricia, just tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Elliot. This is Dr. Tricia Cardner, and I'm the author of Positive Poker along with Jonathan Little, and I do quite a bit of mental game coaching. I make a lot of videos over at Red Chip Poker related to the mental game, and I see clients for mental coaching, and I play poker when I'm not busy with all that stuff.
Sounds great. And I'm a hypnotherapist, and I specialize in working with poker players and UFC fighters. I help people overcome the emotional issues that are behind the problems they have in the cage or at the table. And what we're going to do with this podcast series is invite on successful athletes, successful poker players, and talk to them about what they feel made them successful, and get any advice, any tips regarding mindset, mental game, and just ways of progressing your game forward, learning from the pros. So today's guest is Daniel Dvoress. He's a Supernova Elite, and he's also a coach on Run It Once. So Dan, welcome to the show. If you'd like to introduce yourself and just give us an idea of who you are and what you've been doing in poker.
Sure. My name's Daniel, last name Dvoress. My online poker name is Oxota or Oxota, which is what everyone kind of knows me by. I've been playing professionally for about 6 years now, and I've played a very wide variety of cash games, MTTs, sit and goes, live. Basically anything that's high stakes and that runs, I'm willing to play. So that's kind of my background, and currently I'm a coach on Run It Once as well, where I make videos every couple of weeks. And I just wrapped up 1 year there, and I got a contract extension there, thankfully.
Congratulations.
Thank you, which I'm very excited about that. So I'll be working with Run It Once for at least 1 more year.
Okay, awesome. And what we're going to be doing is going through questions regarding mindset, how important you feel it is to professional poker, and just some stories and interesting information you can share with our listeners on what you think helps you improve. So just starting off from that, so what was the moment that made you decide to become a professional poker player? When was there a certain win in a tournament or a cash game where you just thought, this is for me, and the career started, or was it something that was planned out sort of longer term?
It was kind of a really slow progression. I literally started by a friend transferring me $4 to play 1 cent, 2 cent on stars. That's how it started, and I built a bankroll up, and then I was in a lot of university debt at the time. So I started playing more and more poker, and then it was kind of, oh, well, this might be a good way to put a dent into the university debt. And then I started moving up gradually, playing more and more poker, and eventually just smoothly transitioned into playing more full-time.
So did I hear that right? Did you literally start with $4 in your account and you've ground your way the whole way up?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's an even more incredible story. So from $4 in your account from a friend all the way up to high stakes. So congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, it's not I haven't been super nitty with like the no deposit thing. After that, what I did is, like, when I was first playing and they had deposit bonuses and all that, like I went through all of those. So it's not one of those stories where I never put a deposit in and just started with those $4.
Oh, okay.
But all of the money that I've put into poker started with that.
Excellent.
What I love about your story is how you had this idea that, hey, maybe I can pay off some of my school debt, with poker, because there is nothing sweeter than paying off school debt with poker money, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's just, it's so gratifying.
And in terms of you as a professional and sort of how your careers looked, is there sort of any form of scheduling that you follow, or do you just look for the best games at the time? How do you have things set up from that side?
So for me currently, what I do is I look for the best game that runs at whatever time. But it hasn't been like that up until fairly recently. I used to be a very kind of a set schedule grinder, and it used to be like I got to play my 40 hours a week. I got to schedule it in. But I found that as I moved up to higher and higher stakes, you just have to be around when the games run. sometimes, especially with live, there's a really good game that's running and you're going to be playing 16 to 18 hours straight. And that's what you got to do at that point in time. And sometimes it's dead and there's not very much to play at all. So you kind of adapt to that and maybe study instead or do some review. So right now I'm a little bit all over the place, but I'm still very disciplined in actually getting my hours in. But for anyone that is kind of not playing high stakes where they're trying to find the best possible game that's running at the time, I would definitely recommend a set schedule.
Okay, and I mean, you said that you've mentioned a few times that you play multiple game types. A lot of professionals seem to just stick to their favorites. So they'll say, when I'm talking to professionals, they'll say, I'm an MTT grinder, I play heads up, sit and goes, or whatever it might be. What made you decide, and what makes you comfortable playing in all of the game types?
First off, I think there's a lot of crossover that people don't necessarily realize between the different game types. This sounds a little bit silly, but at least all Hold'em games, you're still dealt 2 cards, and 3 cards come out, then another one, and another one.
Right.
It's all the same game, and it's all a game of equities. So how different are the games really? I think that if someone is genuinely skilled in one game, then that skill set can be morphed to for them to become a genuinely skilled player in another game type.
And would you say it's important for a player to get that speciality skill in one first, rather than try and learn them all at the same time? Because in some of the sort of the beginners, I guess the intermediate players I work with, sometimes learning multiple games at the same time can turn into a distraction if they haven't really reached that higher level in a first one. Is that something you would sort of agree with?
That I would agree with completely, yes. Because if you're still starting out and you're not sure of a lot of things, and you try to learn multiple games at the same time, it's just going to become very, very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of jump in and ask you a question. For our listeners who are maybe newer to the game and just starting out, what would be your advice on how to build a great curriculum so that they can master that first game?
So it really depends on what that game type is. It's a little bit too general of a question to try and answer.
So if we took it down into MTTs, someone was starting in MTTs, online MTTs, what would you sort of give them as what would be the starting point? What should their study or week look like? Would you recommend coaching? Should they be doing videos first, then moving on to coaching? Sort of how would you plan it out for someone else if you were taking someone from relatively new beginner and trying to teach them the way all the way up to high stakes?
So if I took a player who knew very, very little and they're just starting out and they're trying to learn MTTs, the first thing I would do is literally spend 1 or 2 weeks with them where I would build charts for them. And it sounds really, really annoying to do and really boring, but especially beginners, they need a good baseline. The problem with, I think, beginners getting a lot of coaching from expert players is that experts don't really get some of the struggles that a beginner may have, and some of the suggestions or recommendations that kind of seem obvious to the expert player and that they would recommend to the beginning player would just go over their head. So, you can't teach a beginning player how to exploit a bubble situation and widen their opening range if they don't even have a default opening range in the first place.
So it's all about building the foundation first and then moving forward from there.
Exactly.
Okay, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And in terms of just shifting over to the mindset side of things, in your career, things around tilt, feelings around tilt issues, was there any moment that, tilt really cost you a lot, financially or even just, psychologically at the table? Any moment really stand out?
I would say there's not a moment that stands out in terms of me just going kind of monkey crazy and spewing off a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's just kind of not my personality type. But on the other hand, I would say that kind of tilt and emotional control at the tables has cost me a lot of money, but cumulatively. Especially when I was starting out, there would be so many times where I would recognize that I'm just not emotionally fit to play at that point in time. And you not playing costs you so much money. And that's something that would, if it's a daily issue where you have to cut sessions short, or you're starting a session late, or whatever it is, or you're just not putting the hours in because you don't have the emotional control to do so, that's costing you more money than, someone that goes kind of monkey crazy and tilts off a buy-in in one hand.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, and it's something that probably most people don't realize. Tilt doesn't have to be the crazy gambling. Just anything that's impacting your emotions and making you do something irrational can cost you a fortune. And, time is money in poker, as you said. And, just controlling that and making some changes to it can save you an awful lot of money. I mean, do you have any advice regarding mindset for beginner players, for intermediate or even high-stakes players who are struggling controlling their mindset?
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting realizations I've had about kind of just mindfulness and tilt issues is that I think that a lot of tilt issues are linked to not having enough of a solid knowledge base. So in my experience, when I've seen myself and other people tilt hardest is when they are upset with themselves. And I think that this will be familiar to a lot of listeners, but what sometimes happens is you make a play that you're mad about at yourself, and it's a play that you knew was wrong, but you made it to prove yourself right. Kind of like a bad river call. Someone bets out, you're beat, but to prove to yourself how good you are and to see their hand and to show yourself that you're right, you throw the money in, and sure enough, they've got you. And that's the kind of stuff where that perpetuates tilt so much. But really those decisions, I think that they're made because there's not enough of a kind of a knowledge base and a foundation.
So you think a lack of confidence is leading to the call?
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you know with 100% certainty what to do in a particular situation, how can tilt ever impact you to make a wrong decision in it if you know the answer?
Yeah, that certainly makes sense.
I was just going to say what's also interesting about it is I think with the newer players, the tendency is to go on tilt because someone did something to you. They sucked out on you or whatever. They played bad, whatever. But then as you move up stakes, it's that frame of I'm not so much mad about what they did, but I'm angry about what I did.
I definitely see a shift with players that the newer players are definitely more upset when, their aces get cracked. Because they feel they're entitled to win the hand, they got their money in good, and how can somebody beat me with a pair of fours? It's incredibly upsetting that they went out of their MTT that way. When I'm dealing with higher stakes players, as you said, it's much more frequently the mistakes that really hurt. It's not the bad beats don't keep up those players and don't keep those players up at night, but the mistakes can do, and that's definitely something we work on an awful lot.
Yeah, I think you're both very, very right. And that's something that I hadn't considered, kind of the perspective of a new player. And I think that kind of tilt goes away with experience. You kind of just get a thick skin towards beats.
Right.
And is that something that so you're playing in a lot of these higher stakes games. Do you ever see some of the stronger regulars, obviously going on tilt for a particular reason or not? Is it something that you can sense at the table or you see in chat, or is it usually the weaker player at the table who's doing that and the pros keep themselves together pretty well?
I can honestly say that I'm shocked at the behavior that I see from regulars at even the highest stakes games, both live and online. Some of the behavior I see sometimes, it's just, well, it's unprofessional, first of all, but I just can't even imagine kind of being in that state at that level.
Yeah.
And every time that I see it, it honestly makes me very happy because I just see it as another way to get an edge in the game.
Yeah, and in what sort of, just for fun, what sort of things are you seeing that your reaction? Is it chat box? Is it emotional betting? Is it going all in very frequently? What sort of thing really stands out to you where you're just embarrassed for them?
The chat box would be kind of the number one giveaway, and especially because that if someone's typing profane things into chat, that what you see in chat is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's just the rest of the iceberg behind the other computer screen.
Yeah.
So you can only imagine if they're typing that into chat, they must literally be burning inside.
Yeah, and I guess that shows you money, doesn't it? You can smell the money when that happens.
Absolutely, yes.
It's so interesting that, I think newer players and even intermediate players would think, oh, the high stakes guys must have it all together. And yet you use the word shocking, like some of what you've seen is shocking. And so what is the most shocking thing you think you've seen?
The most shocking thing I've seen is in a live game. It was a 10, 25, 50, 100 game. So 4 blinds, really big game, and a regular who has, of course I won't say any names, but this was more of an online player who I guess wasn't really used to playing in the live setting. Mm-hmm. And he just legitimately went off on a guy who was, like a recreational player in that game. And he verbally went off on him after the recreational player kind of misplayed a hand and got lucky on him. And I'm just kind of sitting there, what are you doing? Just on so many levels. First of all, why are you educating this person? Second of all, what are you doing? You're going to make him leave. And third of all, get your own emotional state together.
Well, if you want to pass in my business card, it might affect your bottom line. Yeah, I don't know if it's. I can really, truly recommend you give him my business card. But and was that in a home game or a casino game? Because obviously that's another thing pros have to think about if they're in a home game, whether they're going to get invited back.
It was kind of a private game in a casino.
So there is a chance that player's then cost himself a seat in that game.
Well, I actually know that he has.
Yeah, so and that's incredibly professional. Expensive for a professional player, isn't it?
Yes, it's just the future EV of doing that is just,
it just goes back to what you had said at the top of the show, which is where tilt costs you money in ways that you don't think about or you might not even see at the time.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
So that guy might have felt, okay, I've lost some money tonight, but I'm going home or I'm not going to continue playing this way. But what he's missed is the fact that he's lost his invite. And, that's one of those external factors that is actually far more expensive than he was probably aware of.
Setting $100 on fire and, missing an opportunity to pick up $100 on the street the next day, they have the same EV.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's just purely mental control. And I think it is quite difficult for some online players when they do move to live, when there is a difference in play. It's different when somebody's looking at you in the eye as well, isn't it? It creates different emotions when you're not behind the screen anymore. Is that something you've noticed, or is it something that you see in other players at all?
Absolutely, it's something I've noticed. People just take things so much more personally when it's live. Maybe it's the fact that they can't see your face and they're directly sitting in front of you. Maybe it's because online you're usually playing a bunch of tables and your attention is kind of distributed. I don't really know what it is, but that's certainly right.
Okay. And would you say
just
that's
so much more confrontation? Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. I'm interrupting. Is that more with the professionals, do you think, or is that with the more recreational players who get really upset on a normal basis?
Actually, what I would say is the people who get... there is a category of recreational players who do get upset on a normal basis, but I think that kind of the broader group that really gets upset playing live are your online professionals who don't play that much live, but then do play some of the bigger events. And I think that has to do with entitlement. They've been very successful online, and then they get brought into this setting where they're not really comfortable anymore. Things aren't going their way, but they still feel super entitled because they're this, name online, or they're successful online. So it just kind of, their whole world just shatters in front of them a little bit.
And do you think there's much of a bankroll management issue with this as well? Because I certainly often hear about people playing in games live that are pretty much quite a lot higher than they would play certainly, on a standard Sunday or on their normal online games. So they're jumping into games that perhaps they're not genuinely rolled for because they think they have such a huge edge, and then it's hurting them a bit more.
Yeah, definitely a bankroll issue. And another one that I've heard related to that is that and I've heard several professionals say this, is like they feel that because it's live and because everything happens at a kind of a snail's pace, they feel that if they've had a bad day or a bad run, that they're never going to get it back because it's going to take forever to put in the volume.
Right, so there's no get out of jail free card.
Yeah, so they feel like kind of this added pressure almost.
Definitely makes sense. Do you have any sort of advice in terms of what someone should be doing to go from being that good player and then reaching the stage of being a great high stakes player? What's the difference between someone who's good and great, if you can put that into words for us?
So there's a lot of differences. I think that there's kind of two avenues you could go. You can try to improve your skill, and that would be kind of your theoretical knowledge base, your hand reading abilities, all of that, how skillful you are in actually playing the game. And then you could go kind of the mental game avenue, where you just try to play your A game all the time. And I think that people kind of overestimate the gap in skill between, let's say, a guy who plays, 50-cent dollar blinds and the guy who plays 25-50. People think that there's this huge skill gap. And yeah, there is a huge skill gap, but I can honestly say that I would probably take an average 1-2 grinder playing his A game over an average 25-50 grinder playing his C game any day.
Okay. It seems like as you're going, Elliot, as you're going from good to great, you can get the technical skills down, but you're missing some of the mental skills. Is that what you're kind of telling us?
Kind of, but even more than that. So I think like the way you framed it kind of implies that your mental skills are kind of the icing on the cake. What I'm saying is that I actually don't think that they're the icing on the cake. They're not an add-on to solid poker. They're actually a huge component in themselves.
And where would you put it in sort of a percentage? Because I talk to people a lot about this. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm a mental game coach. I really believe that mental game, it can be the difference between making money in a year and losing money in a year. I usually say you've got to be looking at least 30% of your success is mental game, whereas people usually only put about 5%, if that, of their time and investment in trying to improve it. Would you say 30% is about right? Or do you think it's even more?
Okay, well, it's not 5. 5 is ridiculously low. So I think that you need to, if you cut out the extreme cases, so you kind of look at the spectrum of skill and you disregard kind of the really bad end and the really good end. So you cut off the extremes, and so if you're only dealing with players who have an acceptable knowledge of poker and who are pretty well developed, I'd say it's at least 30%. Yes, at least.
Yeah. What I wonder is, as you progress up the ranks, do you think it becomes a greater percentage of that pie?
Yes, because I think once you hit a certain skill level, everyone is kind of it plateaus a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do you think there's sort of an argument there that it becomes the person who can play their A game longest, because A game is relatively equivalent. You're talking about a tiny percentage edge for each player. However, if one person can play his A game for 10 hours and another professional at the table can only do it for 6, that 4 hours of A game versus B or C game is where the money's made. Reg versus reg.
Yes, and so what you said, but I think it's also there's also more of an exponential effect. So what I mean by that is, every session, it's not an isolated session. It's also an investment in the future. So if you play your A game for a session, it didn't just improve how much you made, or it didn't just improve your EV for that session. It also improved what you learned about your opponents in that session. It also improved like new lines or new reads that you came up with during that session. Playing your A game and being really mindful really playing a session is like going to class and building a foundation for future sessions that you're going to play against the same opponents. It's not like writing an exam where it's a one-off.
So it's giving you improved hand histories to review, it's showing you where your true leaks are, rather than when you're playing your B or C game, the mistakes might be more obvious and you just sort of blame it on playing your B or C game, I guess.
Exactly. So it's an exponential growth.
Yeah, so exceptionally important then.
Yeah, I love the way you're framing this up. For people who are listening, I just love this long-term approach that you take to this and just your whole way of thinking about it, because I just very rarely hear people talking about, these specific types of topics.
I think this is the difference between, and this is why I wanted you to come on the show, Dan, is you understand it truly as a long-term game. And a huge number of players I talk to, really, that's the most difficult thing for them to accept, is that even if they're better, they won't win individual sessions. And I'm not just talking about people at low stakes. Even at the mid and high stakes, it can be very painful for a guy to see a bad beat, to make a mistake. And it's a huge difference. As soon as you can really accept it's a long-term game, it just seems to remove so much of the stress, so much of the pressure, and allows people to play their A game far more frequently.
Yeah, and your goal really becomes to kind of fulfill. Well, your goal kind of moves ahead of where you are. It moves to the future. So you view every session as kind of a building block to whatever your future goal is, rather than I must succeed this session, I must end up money, I must whatever.
Yeah, and those things are obviously out of your control.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of you get rid of the elements that you can't control, and you get rid of kind of them influencing your emotional state.
Where was it in your development that you feel like you made this shift in thinking and it just really, came home to you?
I think I really started thinking that mental game is super, super important as I started playing more live. And I think that happened for a couple of reasons. The first reason is kind of simple, and that's because when you're playing live, there's so much information that you could pick up on, that being super zoned in and playing your A game just straight up gives you a huge edge. So I saw the importance of having a strong mental game there. But I also kind of started to understand how important it is to have a strong mental game base in a roundabout way through observing some of the players who were actually losing money. What I noticed was a lot of the people who dumped a lot of money in live games, when they were playing their A game, they weren't actually that bad. You would be surprised, but in high stakes live cash games, there's quite a few players that will, if they're playing their A game, they would actually be a long-term winner in a lot of lineups. But as soon as a few hands go wrong for them, it's like a switch flips and they're a completely different person. They just start shipping stacks in. It's literally as though they have been replaced by someone else in their seat. And they would just proceed to dump buy-ins and buy-ins and buy-ins. And that's when it was kind of like a shock almost. I realized that your mental game is potentially the largest component of your poker game. Because if your mental game's not there, whatever skills you have, you can't apply them.
I mean, in terms of what you do for your mental game, sort of what are your routines? How have you progressed from that side?
So for me, given my current schedule right now, it's sometimes a little bit hard to have a particular routine. When I play live, I always have a routine, though, especially for live tournaments. It's a very strict routine. I get up 2 hours before I have to play. I go to the gym. I shower. I listen to one of your MP3s. I show up to the venue 10 to 15 minutes before the cards are dealt, sit at the table, look around, zone in, talk to everyone, and I'm in the zone. And I think that's very important. But I think everyone has to have their own set of particular things they do before they sit down to play, and it always has to be the same.
Yeah, so just a consistent mindset routine, pre-game routine. And then things like exercise, do you feel that makes a difference in terms of sort of burning off perhaps any excess aggression or emotion, or just physically being fit? Do you think that helps at the table?
I think physically being fit helps in all aspects of life, generally speaking, but for playing long sessions, I think exercise beforehand is extremely important. I find that when I don't exercise, I get really jittery at the table. I start to lose focus. I get bored sometimes. And when I do exercise, I think, like you said, a lot of the excess energy I burn off, and it just works out to be a way better session.
Excellent.
Let me ask you a question. I love what you said about having the pregame routine, and I think it's not given enough attention, in the poker community generally, but also especially in the tournament situation. Do you have any sort of routine that you follow on the breaks to sort of, re-energize yourself or reset yourself?
On breaks, I usually walk as far away from everyone as possible, which is kind of the opposite of what everyone else does. Usually when there's the 15-minute break and everyone gets together and gossips, or like, how do you think I played this hand, whatever. And perhaps it's just my personality type, but I just can't take any of that. I just remove myself from the situation. I need a reset button, really. That's what breaks are for me. Mm-hmm. The break itself is like a mini pre-routine, and my pre-routine is all about kind of calming myself, getting in the zone, becoming super aware. So during tournament breaks, what I usually do is I find a quiet space, wherever that may be, and I just kind of sit down to myself for 5 to 10 minutes and have that time to myself just to reflect. Usually I think back to some of the techniques that Elliot suggests, through kind of some of the mental techniques of kind of picturing a control room in my brain and kind of shifting things there to get my focus back, to get my energy back. All of that revolves around taking time for myself.
I think that's great. And people really need to think about, because we're pretty close to the summertime now, and the World Series will be here before you know it. And a lot of, recreational players or even intermediate players will flock to Las Vegas and maybe not have a pregame routine or a break routine in place. But now would be a great time to get started on working on those.
And they've got time to do that now. You have time to get things in place before the World Series. I think one of the most important things of the World Series that people tend to forget is that you can't play poker every day for 6 weeks without it having a big impact on you. You need some life balance. There are guys, I don't know if, you guys have obviously been to the World Series. The first week there, everyone looks really excited and really fresh. And then you get sort of 4 weeks in, 3 weeks in, as you're coming closer to the main event, and it's like a scene from The Walking Dead. There are guys sitting down to play, a tournament that might be a high percentage of their bankroll. And they literally look like a zombie. And it's just something people really aren't taking enough, they're really not thinking through before they draw out their schedule, the realities of what that does to your body and your mind playing just that many games.
There's definite burnout. And I think, you do need to plan and schedule and actually account for what your body is capable of doing. But I also think a lot of people just do very simple things wrong. I constantly see people just eating like a bunch of sugary food, drinking a bunch of coffee. There are some things that there's no excuse to be doing. If you're going to be destroying your body playing, 12-hour sessions 7 days a week for 6 weeks straight, at least have like a pre-planned diet that you're following, so you're compensating for some of the destroying that you're doing.
And I think it's these little edges that are adding up for you. The fact that you exercise, the fact that you have a pre-game routine, the fact that you're considering the diet. There are lots of professionals out there who, when it comes time that they're hungry, the donut looks good. And I think that's the difference between the guys like yourself, who, a lot of the top guys are in good shape. They are prepared, they are ready, they watch their nutrition, and the guys who are wondering, what's going wrong? I thought I was really good.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people miss is that a lot of these things that you could do right, they are a low skill thing. Playing good poker is actually a very high skill thing. You have to know a lot of things to play good poker, but you don't have to know a lot of things to eat well. You don't have to know a lot of things to exercise. It's a simple decision that you make. It's just effort. It's not skill. And it's very important to distinguish those two things, because yes, you can't be the most skillful person at everything, but you can decide to put in the most effort, and there's no excuse not to.
Especially on the things like you're talking about with the diet and exercise, because, when you're at the series, for example, you can have a meal plan and you can have all your meals delivered to you, and it doesn't even really cost that much money.
I'm sure that's plus EV. For, to get the healthy food delivered has to be the right decision for anyone in those sorts of buy-in tournaments to make.
Yeah, and I so many people I see are constantly coffeeed up or just on whatever substances, and it's really all just simple decisions, right? That there's no excuse for.
And especially, Elliot's pointed out, these are small edges, but you put them together and they add up. So for everybody who's listening, now would be the time to get the diet, the exercise, start meditating, listening to Elliot's MP3s, that sort of thing, because these are little edges, but they can add up and make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And it's a lifestyle change too. So like you said, it's good to start early because you need to integrate these things into your life slowly so that they become standard in your life. It can't be, I'm going to continue as I'm doing right now, but starting day one of the WSOP, everything's going to change.
Yeah, I'm going to run 5 miles before.
Yeah. I haven't exercised in 2 months, but I'm going to run 5 miles every day during the WSOP. Well, guess what? That's not going to happen.
And it's 120 degrees, so there is that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really, really good to hear some top quality advice from someone like yourself, a high stakes player who's had that success. And I think so much of it, I think people listening to this, they might not be thinking about these things on a day-to-day basis, but it's going to be hard for anyone to argue the logic of any of these sort of tips you're giving out here, because it just seems so obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's a simple decision. It's just a choice.
Well, I mean, as I say, it's really good to hear, and I think that's probably. Patricia, have you got any more questions for Dan, or?
Well, I guess I would just love to hear the thing that surprised you the most about being a professional poker player.
The thing that surprised me the most, well, tying into everything that we've kind of been talking about, what constantly surprises me the most is how many other professional poker players do the simplest things wrong. And that will never cease to amaze me.
And the good news is they'll never stop either. So.
Yeah.
So even though people complain constantly that it's getting harder to make money in poker, it sounds like you're still finding lots of little avenues where it can definitely be done.
Yeah, I mean, yes, things get harder, but so what? Things getting harder is good, because when things get harder, usually that means that there's also more edges that you could get.
Exactly.
Perfect. Looking on the bright side. Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Dan. Really, really
Thank
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Elliot.
And in terms of where people can find you said Run It Once. Do they sign up for a subscription on the site?
Run It Once has 2 subscriptions. There's an essential subscription and there's an elite subscription. So the essential one is much cheaper. I'm not sure on the prices, but I think it's literally 10 times cheaper or something like that. It's a monthly subscription, and that's sort of geared towards lower stakes players or beginning players.
And do you have videos on both, or just one of them?
I just have the elite videos.
Okay.
So the elite videos, they're more geared to high stakes players or really advanced players. But the forums, you don't even have to have a monthly subscription to access. So it's free to post on the forums, it's free to read the forums, and then the video section is subscription-based.
I mean, if anyone's listened to you today, everything you've said makes so much sense. I'm sure they can understand the value they can get out of watching your videos as well.
I hope so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And Tricia, where can people find information about your books, Tricia?
They can go over to drtriciacardner.com, of course, amazon.com, or I make quite a few videos on redchippoker.com.
Okay, excellent. If anyone wants to find any of my products, I'm pokermindcoach.com, and I, as I say, do hypnotherapy sessions and also produce MP3s that we discussed earlier in the show. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to hearing from you next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.